Herzlich willkommen auf der Bühne 1, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen der Kommunikationsbranche. Mein Name ist Ferit Jari und ich habe die Freude und Ehre, Sie durch den heutigen Vormittag zu führen. Ich bin Vorstandsmitglied des PRVA und selbst seit vielen Jahren im Bereich der politischen Kommunikation und der Public Affairs tätig. Unser erster Programmpunkt heute an diesem Vormittag wird auf Englisch stattfinden, deswegen werde ich jetzt auch entsprechend umsteigen. I will switch now to English. Without Corona, the climate change would still be topic number one worldwide, and it will be again, I'm sure. But in the moment, we face also a political climate change, and the question is how to manage this political climate change we face, actually. Somebody who can explain and analyze this political climate change is our first speaker today on stage number 1. Peter Koeppl, Managing Director of Mastermind Public Affairs Consulting. Peter, please join me on the stage. We are happy to have you with us. Peter, do we have to fear the political climate change?
Well, thank you and good morning. No, I don't think so that we have to fear it. It does have some threatening elements in it, but it also offers some opportunities and some chances to champion on.
So we are very curious to learn more about that. Please use the possibility of question and answers. Please put your question in the chat, in the Q&A slot on the website. And please do it while Peter is speaking, then we can take your questions in the part after your keynote. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ferry. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me and thanks for tuning in. I have approximately 20 minutes to walk you through a couple of analytics regarding the ongoing changes, as Ferry has mentioned before. And the new, as people are talking right now, is that the climate change in politics is eminent. The political environment for companies, institutions, and NGOs is currently changing profoundly. Topics, priorities, and stakeholders, they are being reshuffled constantly. It's an evolving process, and we are right in the middle. But it means also that corporate goals come under pressure, projects fail, and even successes are being met with tremendous criticism. And the question is, how can public affairs, which is political risk management at its core, maintain the room to maneuver for companies and institutions? Well, having said that, we have to keep in mind that politics is always about change, and topics, priorities, and stakeholders are always moving targets. What does it mean, politics is always about change? Well, without being too cynical, politics is at least about selling change, because we have to keep in mind that the majority of voters does not want change at all. Topics and priorities are reshuffled. They change all the time. But as a matter of fact, right now, with fighting the pandemic, combating with climate change, the acquisition and the distribution of vaccines, and the avalanche of activism we see right now, those aspects, they do form severe changes which are going to last. So the question for us in public affairs is where to locate corporate goals in this chaos, how to allocate resources, and how to go after the political shift we are striving for. What we see right now, and it started a couple of years ago before the pandemic took off, is a political movement that can be labeled with rallying around the flag. I'm going to point out 4 motives of this political movement, which I believe to be critical for us in our communication efforts. Motive number 1 would be to protect. Government, all governments, they want to make people believe that government can and government will protect them against all adversities, against all evils out there. If it's the pandemic, it's climate change, or it's smaller issues at all. In order to do so, politics create enemies. To make people believe, enemies need to be defined that hinder government in protecting us, which is, for example, if we reside to Austria, the European Union, or the technology companies, or pharmaceutical companies, or businesses overall. What it leads to is a downfall and a pretty pity for us in government affairs. It means protectionism. We see nationalistic approaches that are being created not only in Austria, but also in Germany and other European countries, or more or less globally. Nationalistic approaches that prefer national products over multinational products. Companies, national companies are favored and foreign companies are blamed. And politics using, like always, but now more than ever, symbols to create a buy-in from the electorate. This is essential for emotional appeals to connect with the electorate, to create a connection between politics and the electorate on a daily basis in our digital democracy. I just figure out some issues you might know from Austria. The baby elephant, for example, is a typical symbol for security. Border checks, they should symbolize safety. Or the daily press conferences on the pandemic, which should give us guidance that somebody is taking care. But what it means at a very common level is we are facing right now a stress test to democracies. Democracies do come under more and more pressure. So why is that so? The economic change that is going on and the perception of injustices raise questions among the people about the ability of politics and government to act. Frustration with globalization, not really a new issue, but again being on top of mind of all politicians, of all media people, and of people out there. This frustration continues to grow as many factors do hinder income growth and makes it difficult for governments more and more to create wealth, what people are striving for. And what we do have at a very increasing number is a growing disappointment about the perceived lack of security, lack of education, and lack of employment policies by the state, which at the end of the day leads to increasing political destabilization we see when we switch on TV or any online channel. I'd like to cite Mr. Harari, who had a couple of quotes in his books one can use when talking about politics. But the next point I want to stress is that what he framed the greatest danger that now faces liberal democracy is that the revolution in information technology will make dictatorships more efficient than democracies. To be true, this is pretty harsh, but at the core, it is this divide that is created between the fast-moving technological improvements and the still pretty slow political involvements. So technology, we all know, is developing a lot faster than politics can follow. Some even say speed kills democracies because elections, the election systems, but also political parties and institutions like parliaments, they are processing the data much too slow in comparison to the technology features that are out there. What does it mean? Voters tend to believe that democratic processes can no longer help them solving problems, understanding the context, finding their place in the world. They resort to alternative news because they find information that helps them to understand their situation. We have viewed Brexit, anti-establishment governments, anti-establishment movements, like in the United States when Trump came into power. We do face increasing power of NGO campaigns, all tapping into this motive of people needing more and more guidance and politics that is acting too slow or even too less. One could say this is a political power shift again, but as I said at the beginning, changing targets, changing policies, changing stakeholders is a constant when we talk about politics. But just to give you a little context some of you might already know. But I think it's always good to have in mind when analyzing political situations is that around 70% of the global population does not get beyond a 30-kilometer radius from their place of birth in their whole life. There was even a report in the Austrian newspaper Kurier the other day regarding this issue. What this means is that those approximately 70%, they are frightened by globalization and digitization a lot because it creates fear. They cannot follow anymore. Those streams lead to cultural and economic overload. It's fear people feel right now, the breeding ground for nationalism and populism. And if we tap a little into social psychology, this situation also supports the us versus them thinking, the in-group versus out-group thinking, which I don't want to go into too much detail here, but politics uses this motive to protect its people to form a homogeneous group, like the Austrians or the Germans. So we're reciting back to a lot of nationalism. So Ferry asked me at the very beginning, do we have to be afraid of those situations, of those developments? I don't think so. I always see opportunities and I always see chances. It is true that we have to keep being aware and being critical, but especially for public affairs, for the government affairs function of corporations, businesses, institutions, NGOs and institutions. This means we need to take the lead, analyzing, interpreting political developments and finding the right answers to guide businesses and institutions in this turmoil. It means engaging with external stakeholders, including government, has become increasingly important over the last years and especially important throughout the last 1.5 or 2 years. Another downfall here, public trust in businesses and government is on the decline. It's a constant decline and it hits government and institutions much more than businesses. There's even a new poll out there in the United States, at least it was published a couple of weeks ago, that right now, where trust has been diminished, trust into media and political institutions, people do reside with businesses to find the right answers and to find guidance, which means, again, we, in public affairs, we have to take the lead. But as a matter of fact, in this environment, and some of you might have figured out, like me, in the last 13 or 14 months, in this environment, it becomes challenging to advocate for public policy change, to advocate, to lobby for its own issues. It's even difficult to gain political support when everybody is covered with fighting the pandemic or fighting climate change, and to maintain a strong reputation. If, for example, pharmaceutical companies are faced with criticism right now by politicians and by the media, it deeply cuts into the reputation. The same is true for technology companies. Institutions or businesses, that is more or less, that are asked for and that are looked for to give guidance and to provide help in this situation. Reputation is a critical aspect right now. But what remains the same in all those changes is every organization, every company is impacted by the laws, by the regulations, and by the policies passed by governments. So there is a very urgent need, especially in these critical times, to articulate your policies, to articulate and lobby for your interests. At the very beginning, I said public affairs at its core is political risk management, and that is exactly what we need right now. Public affairs professionals today do have to cover a lot more of jobs and topics than maybe 10 years ago. It's not only about lobbying, it's not only about keeping up the reputation, it's not only about creating good relationships with civil servants and political decision makers. It's also about educating policymakers about the issues, because the room has become narrow for other issues than fighting the pandemic or fighting other crises. But educating about what policy means and what policies are necessary to cover, this is our job right now. But we also we also need to be very much aware of alerting our clients or alerting management to legislative risks and opportunities in times when political regulation and political decision-making is under pressure and is picking up speed at least a little more. Picking up speed does also mean that, and we've faced it, not only at the European Union level, but also on the Austrian level, making political decisions in a crisis does also mean that not all interests are being included into the process. So we have to fight for our place on the table. And I think we do need a lot more lobbying to ensure company views are reflected in policy debates and in policy outcomes. We cannot let it happen that only because there's a crisis out there, our issues, our lobbying aspects are not included when politics is making their decisions. As I said, advocacy environment is always changing. If you go back half a decade or a decade, we didn't have a pandemic to fight, but we had other issues to cover. So there's always not only an explanation, but also an excuse for not residing with our arguments and not residing with our issues. So public affairs, government affairs, and communication at large, we need to have a very strong stand right now to cover and lobby our issues. Because, and that's been true for the last, I don't know, 5 to 7 decades, as long as public affairs is an established corporate function. A strong government affairs function is often a critical part of success to fulfilling mission statements, but also in achieving business goals. Having said that, what would be my points for you this morning for takeaways? When you go on to the next stage or the next program point in this tremendously successful conference here, maybe you should keep in mind that adopting or adopt to political shifts that can lead to success are covered by issues like climate positivity, sustainability, but also resilience. It means what can your company, what can your NGO, your institution contribute to those big areas of political decision-making right now. What it also means we have to adapt to critical changing by shifting our scope, our goals, our messages, or even our asks. The times have gone where we simply, stupidly sometimes, remain with our position, and if it's not respected, to go fight for it and do not move. We have to be agile. We have to be resilient ourselves in government affairs and in public affairs. As always, know thy stakeholders. But it's not your list that you have drawn like a year ago. It's not even your list that you have written down 6 months ago. Because stakeholders nowadays, especially digital activists or activisms or NGOs especially, they come and go more frequently, even on a weekly basis. You have to face new stakeholders with new power bases and new communication tools that are not only going after you, but that are competing with your room to maneuver. And at the end of the day, again, it's about creating value, educating politics, policymakers, and stakeholders, and stimulating trust. So public affairs and government affairs in times of political climate change we are right now in has this tremendously challenging but also rewarding aspect of educating why your arguments are important, educating why the goals you are going for are important for the bigger picture, for policy, politics, and the whole society we are living in. And one of my favorite remarks maybe at the end, you can stay at your table at home. You cannot do anything because the climate change in politics is maybe frightening you. But be assured the others are on the move. And if you don't manage your non-market environment, it will definitely manage you. Thank you very much. This would have been my remarks for today. and I think we have a lot of time for discussion.
Peter, thank you very much. So exciting times we are facing and challenging times. You quoted Mr. Harari, who talked about dictatorships and democracies and about efficiency. But on the other hand, I saw some statistics about how the countries managed the corona crisis in the last 12 months. And surprisingly, there was no difference between democracies and dictatorships. So was Harari wrong?
Maybe he was wrong. I think he was, well, what you mentioned, by the way, is something we should be very happy and glad about. The democracies and societies that are maybe shifting away from a liberal democracy were successfully fighting the pandemic. But I think Mr. Harari was after something a little different. It was about controlling communication, controlling about how a society is informed, how liberal this information can be, and what he described in this book, where this quote was from, is that basically the speed of communication and this speed of communication technology we are having at hands right now needs a lot of control. And he said dictatorships are more efficient in controlling the stream of communication by shutting out the broadband, more or less, not the technology broadband, but the issue broadband, and I think that was he after.
But you mentioned also the trust in politicians, in public institutions, governmental institutions is on decline. So what do we have to expect? Does it mean that in some months there is no link anymore between politics and people? What do we have to face at the next elections, for example?
Well, trust is on a decline. That's a trend we see in European democracies over the last 5 years or even up to a decade. It has various reasons, but the question is about what do we have to face. I do strongly believe that we will see for the first time in the upcoming German election, general election this September, that political campaigns will have to stress this trust issue a lot more, because if the electorate doesn't trust the political system anymore, voting participation will go down. And if voting participation goes down, the large political parties, like German CDU and CSU, or the Social Democrats in Germany, they will be on the loser's side. That's what we know from analyzing campaigns. So I think that not only in Germany, but we will see it for the first time, I do believe that all political parties, especially the large one, will focus on these trust issues more, meaning you can trust us because we handled the crisis, for example. You can trust us because we keep you safe. So we will see this trust issue being tremendously covered by political campaigns.
So how can communication contribute to build up trust in politics?
That's a good question. What I think that what I tried to pinpoint is this educational part. And in public relations, in corporate communications, this educational part has always been a quite strong part, especially internally. But I think everybody in communications, is it for NGOs or for institutions or for companies, we have to focus that we shall and that we should educate the public. Educate about what is a company doing, why is it doing things like that, why is it producing, how is it producing the products, how are the products delivered to the people. This is not really a baseline, but in order to stimulate trust, we need to educate and explain a lot more. And I think this is a challenge right now for everybody in communication, not only public affairs.
So it's only one of a lot of challenges we will face in the next months and years. You said in the beginning of your keynote that voters don't want change, but maybe that could change now, because maybe Corona changed everything, and so probably there will be a firestorm of change in the next year. What do you expect? Will we see in I don't know, let's say in 1 year, 27 new governments in the European Union?
Well, I haven't my glass bowl with me, so I can't tell really. I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, there are a couple of democracies within the European Union that have political change as a constant, like Netherlands, or even UK, which is not a member of the European Union anymore. But I believe that especially when it comes to crisis or the time after the crisis, people will reside with those parties in government that have led them through a crisis more or less. It's my personal opinion. I might be wrong. I might be totally wrong. But usually when you look to the United States, for example, which have this two-party system, it's every campaign for the last 200 years is either change or remain, stay at the same issue, right? And change was always at good times, never at bad times. So one could say, which leads me to the expectation that we will not see a tremendous wave of change within the European Union.
Let's talk about it in 1 year, then we will see what really changed. Peter, thank you very much for your keynote and for your answers. Unser nächster Blog heute am Vormittag wird eine Diskussion sein zum Thema der Herausforderungen der Reisebranche, die ja tatsächlich auch jetzt in den letzten 12 Monaten einiges mitgemacht hat mit der Corona und dementsprechend vor großen Herausforderungen steht. Bleiben Sie dran, wird eine spannende Diskussion.